All right, so day 11 of Kines here. We've only got one day left in our 12-day course, and then I guess Marsha, I guess you're the only first modder, here for right now. But then
Yes.
you will have made it past the hard hump. It's like, I always like to picture like our 12-day classes for the new folks. It's like the first week of working out. Like, you guys know, like, new routine soreness,
Yeah.
where it's like, you're like, I'm good, I'm doing so great, my workouts are going really well. And then you change it up and you wake up the next day and you're like, oh God. And then you get past the first week and it's like, it all goes away,
Well, I started going back to the gym for the past month and a half because of my
Oh, since
knee.
quarantine and all
Yeah,
that?
yesterday was my first day after
Oh, that's
long,
exciting.
so
I
I'm
love
very
that.
excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. What's funny about knee stuff? I woke up with a little bit of knee pain, and I have no idea where it came from. A little knee instability action, and I was like, I just woke up yesterday, and I was like, who attacked me in the middle of the night? Yeah, I've never had knee pain before in my life, and it just like it kind of came out of nowhere. So we'll see what
Wow.
happens.
Be careful.
I know, right? I gotta go play frisbee today. So we'll see how the sprints go. Actually, the sprints will be fine. I'm curious how the cutting will go.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, thanks. But yeah, so we'll make it through this hump. Today is our last lecture, and then tomorrow we'll have our in-person meetup / final exam. Everything we talk about today is going to be very relevant in tomorrow's lesson. We spent a whole bunch of time looking at the lumbopelvic hip complex last time we met. When we were looking at all that overhead squat stuff, we really spent a lot of time looking at the hips and all that. And to next time, we're going to kind of really spend some time looking at like upper body dysfunction. So that'll be kind of good because we'll kind of finish up the body there, and we'll really get through all of our specific assessments. So all right, so taking a look at the cervical spine here, we are going to see our vertebral column. Now, we're not just looking at the cervical spine, we are going to kind of look at the whole spine, which means we're going to kind of ease back in almost a little bit into that lumbopelvic hip complex area, which I know is obviously there's a lot of that, but particularly we are kind of paying attention to the upper body today. So when we're talking about your vertebral column, we are talking about all of the 24 vertebrae you've got, as well as all of the 31 pairs of spinal nerves. So when you're looking at your spinal nerves, it's kind of an interesting arrangement here. You can see, right? This is actually somebody else's PowerPoint apparently. But you can actually see where like they are going to branch off. That's the peripheral parts of our nervous system. It kind of branches off from these little axes here, right? And so as we're looking at it and which nerves we've got, you've got your C1 through 8 nerves, T1 through 12 nerves. So that's the same as the number of vertebrae there. L1 through 5 verbs, verve like the band, nerves there. And then you've got your sacral nerves. Sacral nerves are kind of interesting. They branch out from the sacrum, which is technically one bone, but it's actually a lot of bones fused together. So technically there's your S1 through 5. They're all just kind of like fused. That's all kind of comes together. If you ever want a fun, like, piece of trivia for like expecting parents or whatever, it's always kind of a fun fact. It's like, who has more bones, a baby or an adult? It's kind of interesting, but it's like, as you actually have way more bones when you're a baby because they all start to fuse together as you become an adult. I think of myself as much more complicated than like an infant, but according to the skeletal system, not so much. But you can kind of see that here. And then your coccyx has got its little nerves kind of branching out as well, and that's also a couple fused bones coming together. So that is the individual sections there. But if we're talking about the vertebrae themselves, we're just talking about your C1 through 7. That's your cervical vertebrae, one counting from the top going down. Then you got your T1 through 12, that's your thoracic vertebrae. You get your L1 through 5, that's your lumbar vertebrae. Sacrum at the bottom, coccyx after that. So lots of little tiny muscles that are going to kind of control all of that. And so if we see neck pain in our clients, right, we're particularly talking about pain in these vertebrae right here. Mostly your C2 through 6. Obviously, there's the C7 down there, but if you look at it, you can see it's almost getting pretty darn similar to our thoracic vertebrae at that point. We don't see a lot of pain in that one commonly, only because it's a little stiffer, or it's a little bigger and a little more, resistant to damage and stuff. I'm actually trying to remember, like, when Peyton Manning had a cervical, which vertebrae? Because he had to have his vertebrae fused together. And it was between a C6 and 7. Yeah. So a lot of times you'll see like a little bit of damage in between like 6 and 7. And so they'll often fuse it to number 7 because of it being like such a stable base of support. And then we don't see as much in the C1 there, because if we did, that would be a very severe injury. Your C1 is the very top of your vertebrae that supports your entire skull. We talked a little bit about this in the beginning parts of kines. These are actually two of my favorite bones in the entire body. You've got your atlas and your axis vertebrae. Very, very, very cool bones here, and shaped very uniquely compared to the rest of your vertebrae, which is important because that allows us to actually keep our heads upright while we are sprinting at maximum effort. So that's something that's actually pretty rare in the animal kingdom, being able to run while keeping our head like supported and upright. That allows us to open our mouths like that, which brings in air and vents out heat, which is something a lot of other animals can't do. A lot of times their jaws will kind of get locked down while they are sprinting because their head gets into a locked position. So that's probably one of our evolutionary advantages that put us on top of the food chain, even more so than some of the other things. So the atlas vertebrae, it's also my favorite name of any bone in the entire body, because if you think about like who Atlas was, he was the Titan that was cursed to hold up the sky in Greek mythology, and so this is cursed to hold up our skull, which I think is kind of fun. So we see injuries in this all the time, probably much more commonly in women actually than it is in men. Obviously, that's going to be tied to something we are going to be talking about in our next course actually. So not to stray too far into PFT 106, where we're heading on Friday, but we do know that osteoporosis is going to be much more common amongst female populations due to estrogen changes and things like that. But with that decreased, with osteoporosis comes decreased bone density. With decreased bone density, we do see fractures and injuries, much more common in the cervical spine, which is why neck pain is so much more common amongst female populations. And so one of the most common ones is going to be disc herniations. So again, this is actually the same as sort of a slipped disc or a torn disc or a herniated disc. What else do people call it? Discs out of alignment. This is the same injury we talked about when we were in the lumbopelvic hip section. The only difference is this is taking place in the cervical spine instead of in the lumbar spine. But basically what happens is we will see a tear in this fibrous lining here, and then this nuclear material, which is more actually called the nuclear pulposus, which is so freaking hard to say. It's a mouthful. Starts leaking out. So that nuclear material leaks out of that lining there, and then starts pinching between the peripheral nerve and the bone. And so that obviously causes lots of aches and pains, oftentimes like irradiating numbness or tingling, and sometimes that will shoot down the arm. And so oftentimes you'll hear people say they've got pain in like these two fingers here. And then there's one that I want to talk about really quickly that isn't in the PowerPoint, but another one, you are going to see this in capstone. This is mentioned in your corrective exercise textbook. But we've also got what is known as thoracic outlet syndrome. So this is a very common upper body injury associated with poor posture. And what will happen in thoracic outlet syndrome, actually, that's a great picture right there, is you can see there's actually these muscles right here, right? There's our cervical spine right there in the neck, right? And there's your collarbone. So that's your clavicle, and there's your very top rib. So this is your first rib, right? And then there's your clavicle. And look at right here. You can see there's this nerve that's running down. There's also this artery running right here, as well as a vein traveling back to the heart, right? So what can happen is if you get really tight musculature, it can move your clavicle, right? Particularly one of the muscles we're talking about today, which is known as your sternocleidomastoid. It's my favorite muscle because that name is ridiculous. And what can happen is because the sternocleidomastoid starts getting so tight, it can actually pinch the nerves that are traveling down. Now, the blood vessels, they're pretty much okay. I mean, they can obviously get compressed as well, but like they are squishy tubes that can kind of open up and blood can travel through, but if your pec minor and your sternocleidomastoid, both of those muscles, and your scalenes actually, which we'll talk about those today as well, if those particularly those three muscles start getting really, really tight, it can pinch the nerve, and that can travel down and cause sort of a numbness or a radiating pain down the arm. And that is sort of like piriformis syndrome of the arm. Like it's this pinched nerve that causes like a lot of aches and pains. And so that is definitely associated with our poor posture, and definitely causes irritation in a lot of our clients. Another one we're going to see is upper crossed syndrome. Now, this isn't necessarily an injury, but just like we were talking about lower crossed syndrome the other day, if we look at lower crossed syndrome, we are going to see that classic, I talk about it all the time, but the anterior pelvic tilt, right? And so we start to see, a client with an excessive lumbar rotation here, right? Excessive lumbar extension, right? And so we see like these tight muscles in the front here and these tight muscles in the back, and then we see the weak muscles back here. Well, what that can do is that can travel up the kinetic chain and cause problems in the upper body. So we start to see what is called upper crossed syndrome. And so that's that rounded shoulders posture, and again, we call it crossed syndrome because we see tight muscles back here, and we see tight muscles down here. We see weak muscles up here. So that very common posture where we see like rounded shoulders and a forward head posture, that hunched posture, rounded shoulders, that often leads to upper back, neck pain, and it can even lead to like tension headaches, weirdly enough, because the muscles that are actually pulling this way are also pulling on all that fascia of the skull. And so those headaches right in the back of the skull can sometimes be problematic there. So there's our upper cross syndrome. That is something we are going to be looking very carefully at today because it is very, very common. Now, just taking a look one more time at those vertebrae and understanding our sections here. So remember, we've got our cervical vertebrae is going to be our neck. Our thoracic vertebrae is the upper back. Our lumbar vertebrae is the lower back. And then we've got our sacrum and coccyx there. So ideally, there should be a natural curve in your spine. If you look at your spine, if you look at your vertebrae, there is sort of a natural curve here, right? And you can see that, right? Like it sort of makes this natural S shape. So there should be some arch to the low back, but where we start to run into problems is where there is an excessive arch in the low back, right? So we start to see what is known as lordosis. So lordosis is an increased posterior, so that's on our backside, concavity. So we see an extra crease, a concave shape in the low back of the lumbar and cervical curves. So this is excessive low back arching, right? So if I type in lordosis, I guarantee we'll see at least one picture if I scroll enough of like a ballerina or like a dancer, you know? Come on, internet. They're the best example. Yeah, oh, I mean, I bet a lot of these people are dancers. My guarantee is not working out. But the ballerina is, oh, there it is, dancer picture, boom. That is a dancer's shirt if I've ever seen one. But we see this increased arching of the low back, right? And so that is what we call, if we're using sort of the medical term for it, we're going to call that lordosis, because this bottom portion here is called your lordotic curve. You can see this natural sort of arching of our lumbar, right? That is our natural lumbar curve. But if we see way too much of it, we just call it lordosis as sort of a condition or an injury. So that's a really common one that we're going to see, you know, that excessive sort of arching there. And like I said, that's that anterior pelvic tilt, right? Like that's excessive anterior rotation of the pelvis and excessive extension of the lumbar portion of the spine, right? And then that's going to travel to the upper body and cause what is called kyphosis. So kyphosis is increased anterior concavity. So lumbar arching is posterior concavity. Upper body anterior concavity, that's rounding, right, of the thoracic curve. And so we will sometimes see kyphosis, which is upper back rounding. So if I look up, we can actually even see kyphosis in this example here. You can see she's got lordosis in the lower body and kyphosis in the upper body. Somehow I ended up on an image stock website. But there you go. Actually, that's the picture I was looking for. So you can actually see, right? She's got a kyphotic curve and a lordotic curve. You'll often see this in seniors, right? I look up kyphosis here. You know, we see a lot of seniors struggling with this as we get older, right? We see that sort of collapsing down, and we're seeing it in younger and younger populations nowadays. Again, thanks to these freaking things, you know, like we're on our phones all day, and it causes this sort of excessive kyphosis. So we kind of see that rounding there. And that's the upper cross syndrome we're really spending a lot of time on. Now, occasionally, you will also see lumbar kyphosis. So kyphosis, right, that's rounding. So lordosis is arching, kyphosis is rounding, but sometimes you will see lower back kyphosis. And so we'll see lumbar kyphosis, which is the posterior pelvic tilt. That's sort of like the butt tuck. This one, this one's a little harder for me to Google. But you'll see like a little bit of rounding in the lower back section. Yeah, kind of. The flat back posture. There we go. So you'll see this kind of thing. Ooh, that is a tiny picture. Oh, that's a bummer. But the posterior shift, right? They got a flat back, they got a posterior pelvic tilt. We don't see it quite as commonly. You don't see it in as many populations, but it definitely is like a very, very common problem. You'll see this, you know, in people who deadlift sometimes. They'll have that really bad habit of rounding their spine. But that's the posterior pelvic tilt. Also very much problematic, right? It's the Shaggy from Scooby-Doo posture, you know? He's always kind of an example of that. It's like anterior pelvic tilt. I always think of like Donald Duck, you know, he's always sticking his butt out. And then I always think of Shaggy whenever I'm thinking of that posterior tilt. And then there is also the scoliosis. So scoliosis is going to be a lateral pelvic shift. You can actually see an example of that here. See how they're tilting to one side, right? So this is coming from like tightness in a couple different places. You can see sometimes the scoliosis can be caused by, tight muscles in the upper back, right? Maybe you just spend all day kind of leaning into your chair like this, right? Doesn't look like that bad, right? But if I maintain my shoulder where it is and I just stand back to neutral, look at all that, looks level, doesn't it? Looks pretty natural when I do it on camera, right? But then you can just see how much that is, right? If I lean over to this side, it's a little bit more noticeable. It's actually because I do tend to lean to my left or right a lot, but again, you can kind of see that drop there. So that can cause like a little bit of a lateral curvature because those muscles get so tight, right? They're getting a signal from your nervous system 24 hours a day, 365 days a year to stay contracted. Which obviously, they're not really designed to do. So that's not what we're going for. We also see lumbar scoliosis. You'll sometimes see it in the lower section. If you sit on if you sit on your wallet all day, that'll often happen. So for instance, like if you tighten up the lower QL muscles, that can actually, if you remember your quadratus lumborum, right? That's that muscle that attaches from your bottom rib and pulls up your pelvis. So if you sit on your wallet all day on one side, like my dad, right? My dad, if you look at his jeans, you can see the outline of his wallet because he puts it in the same exact spot every single day. And so that can cause that to tighten up because you're essentially elevating one side of your pelvis, right? And so then your spine has to shift back the other way. And a lot of times what'll happen is, you sit on your wallet over here, and so that shortens this side and lengthens this side, and then that causes you to kind of collapse over here. And so that sort of elevates this side and drops this side. So it sort of, shifts back in the opposite direction. We shift to the left and we shift back to the right. So that is what's known as a functional scoliosis. This isn't somebody who was born with a scoliosis. This is somebody who has developed a scoliosis through sort of bad habits, right? So there is sort of a difference there, but that's a scoliosis in general is going to be a lateral curvature. Now, if you got a client who is born with a scoliosis, naturally, it is going to be something they can work on through their posture. But, without like actually fixing like structural, we're not changing structural skeletal bone, so the amount of impact we can have can be limited. So looking at our intervertebral discs one more time, remember, there is this sort of elastic material that allows for some compression and twisting to take place. We have this padding in between each of our vertebrae. And so if that padding gets worn down or injured or becomes less resilient over time, as most of our tissues do, we definitely see that material, that annulus, gets torn, and so that nuclear material starts to leak through. That's where it starts to cause problems, right? So where we'll see this a lot of times is clients who struggle with either flexion or extension of the spine. So if that's happening in the lumbar section, right, this would be like lumbar flexion, this would be lumbar extension, but there is also obviously the cervical parts of it, like cervical flexion and cervical extension. It just depends on where you are describing it as taking place in the spine there. So those are that's sort of an overview of why we're going to understand some of these muscles today. Let's go ahead and take a look at our first one here. So this is my favorite muscle because the name is just so silly, but it's the Sternocleidomastoid. I've always thought that sounds like a dinosaur, like the majestic Sternocleidomastoid from Jurassic Park 9. But no, this is the muscle right here on the front of the neck. And so you can actually feel this pretty easily. If you guys just place your hands right here on your neck and just press a little bit too hard, honestly, not even that hard, you'll even feel this is kind of a tender muscle. And it's tender because guess what? It's tight on freaking everybody. It is just this really tight muscle there in the front of our neck. So the reason it's called the sternocleidomastoid, if you look at it, right, you can see there's our sternum, right? This is our manubrium, which is the top of our sternum, but that's the sternum, right? And then we got our clavicles. So there's sternocleido, and then it runs right up here to this really hard little bone right here, just behind the very back of our ear and the very bottom of our ear there. That's known as your mastoid process. That's where you do all your masticating or chewing, as it's known. But that's the process right there. So you'll even feel if you press sometimes back here that gets really tight and very painful as well. In fact, that's a very common pressure point. And so that is our sternocleidomastoid there. Now, what this muscle does is when it concentrically, shortens, when it contracts, it creates cervical flexion. So again, right, that's going to be this motion right here. So yes, it does contract on the front. That makes perfect sense, based on where we can see it's sort of like, pulling us down kind of like this. But it also does cervical rotation. So it does a little bit of this as well. And it does do a little bit of lateral flexion. So when this side contracts, it pulls us that way. When this side contracts, it pulls us that way. Just a little bit of that lateral flexion movement. So if we're trying to stretch this muscle, which trust me, you need to, we want to do sort of the opposite of those things, right? We want to do a little bit of anti-rotation, right? If the right pulls me to the left, if the right pulls me to the right, then I want to look over to my left. And if it does like a little bit of lateral flexion, then I'm going to do lateral flexion in the opposite direction and get a pretty good stretch right there, actually. Also, if it's in charge of flexion, well, then I'm going to get a little bit more by taking myself into extension. So this stretch right here, just looking up at a sort of a 45-degree angle, is a pretty good sternocleidomastoid stretch. My favorite version of this, though, is also to make sure with the opposite arm, I am reaching down, because that is going to drop my collarbone in response and pull on the other end of the muscle. And sometimes I'll even use my hand to depress my collarbone. I'll press down on it with my opposite hand. So I'll press down, I will reach with my right arm, and I will press my right collarbone down, look to my left, drop the head, and lean back. And that is a really good sternocleidomastoid stretch. Try that out. You will feel that loosen up directly right in here. And it's great. It is a really good one. So this muscle is going to stabilize our collarbone. It's going to stabilize the cervical portions of our spine. And it does do all of that eccentric, decelerating action as well. So this is one of our big bad guy muscles. This is one of our very tight, overactive muscles. One other thing that this muscle does, by the way, that NASM's not listing here, it is also in charge of spinal translation. Translation is this sort of sliding movement that takes place this way, right? If this is flexion, this is extension, which is sort of a bending movement. That sort of sliding action is also common there. So sternocleidomastoid, where we see a client whose head has sort of slid forward and flexed forward, right? Say forward flex, and then to take their head up in order to be able to still look forward, right? That is that upper back rounding. This is definitely a very, very tight muscle there. And so we definitely want to stretch out our sternocleidomastoid. So obviously you're not going to be able to place a foam roller on this, but we do know where it inserts and where it originates. So if you want to give yourself a little bit of just, and I would be very gentle, guys, a little bit of gentle massage on that muscle, you can do that. And I hate it. Does not feel great. But it is a very, very commonly tight one. And so probably a good one to do. We are also going to see our scalenes here. Your scalenes are in the cervical spine. Now, this is kind of an interesting one. You can see this is a very large group of muscles. So if I look up scalenes, you'll actually see there's a bunch of these. Ken Hub has been nice enough to sort of loop them all up. But you can see, right? all those individual pieces. But technically, you've got your middle, you got your posterior, you got your anterior, right? Lots of little sections there, different sort of fibers depending on like who you ask. But we're going to go ahead, be a little more simplistic about it. Oh, excuse me. We are going to loop those up and we're just going to call them the Scalenes Group. Okay. Now there is sort of a, where'd that go? A little bit of a difference here in like this version. The reason there is sort of a difference between the various scalenes is because you can see like this one's going to our second rib there, but then this one here is going to the first rib. But here's the thing, if you group them all up, they are grabbing the first and second rib. Okay, and you can even see, actually, never mind. I thought Nassim put that definition in there. But that's their job, is to isometrically stabilize that first and second rib there. And then they are attached to our spine. So obviously when they concentrically shorten, they are going to create a little bit of cervical flexion, particularly the anterior fibers, right? They do a little bit of rotation. They do a little bit of lateral flexion. So your scalenes and your sternocleidomastoid are very similar. But one of the biggest things that they also do is it actually lifts up your ribs during inhalation. So when you take a big deep breath in, right, that's actually going to lift up your ribs to allow your lungs to have a larger cavity to fill. So your scalenes are supposed to be there to help with really extreme breathing. Okay, so when you are taking like gasping for breath, you know, like you're sprinting and you're just breathing as hard as you can, your scalenes are actually doing a lot of work. They're like, right, they're kind of lifting up the ribs there. But here's the thing, they are secondary respiratory muscles. Your main muscle that is supposed to do most of your breathing, that is your diaphragm, right? But when you start using those scalene muscles, you know, that's fine because they're there to help. But remember, they are also posture muscles. So this becomes problematic. When we start to use our posture muscles for breathing, we're using secondary respiratory muscles for breathing. The reason that that is so problematic is because like now we are going to alter our posture, right? We are doing this thing that screws up our posture rather than just like allow us. We're changing our posture all day, every time we take a breath. That's not awesome. This is highly associated with very shallow breathing patterns. So when you have somebody who kind of breathes like this, like, right, they're very stressed out, right? Stress can very much tighten up your scalenes. You know, you see that kind of like, you know, elevated shoulder stuff. And again, we know stress is associated with those tension headaches, like we talked about earlier. We know that stress alters our posture. It leads to this upper cross syndrome, that upper back rounding that we talk about. So guess what? This is also a very, very tight muscle that we need to loosen up. So your scalenes do a little bit more. They're a little bit more on the side. So one of the best ways to get them is just to drop the head to the right or to the left and just give that a nice gentle pull. And again, because this is in charge of elevating the ribs, I'm going to really focus on breathing into the low section. Guys, try this out right now, actually. Take your head over to one side. So take your head over to one side like this. Drop this arm down. And I also like to have a little external rotation there. So drop your arm down like this. And now breathe into the lowest part of your stomach that you can. Do you feel that it will stretch your neck by breathing into your stomach? It's a very odd sensation to think that like this taking a breath down here is going to affect the stretch up here. But it does, because like when you breathe into your diaphragm, right, it inhales, it drops you are using these muscles here rather than elevating that rib. You're primarily relying on this other section. So it pulls on the scalenes. And so that is a very effective stretch there. Again, one that we definitely want to know how to do. So you'll see different versions of scalene stretches out there. But the big one that you'll see is, you know, going off to the side like that. I will say she's kind of just got her arm drop there. It looks like she's just got her arm drop there. What she's actually doing is she's gripping the chair on the opposite side to draw her arm even further. So if you do want to do that, you'll see people grabbing the side of a chair. That's helpful. I think really just, you know, just reach as, you know, because a lot of times you're going to be doing this in a gym setting, so you'll be standing. So just reach as if, like, you know, I always tell people it's like your keys are just 6 inches out of your hands. Then we've got our deep cervical flexors. Now, this is also kind of a surprising one on our list. This is one of our weakened muscles. So there's going to be 2 of them here. You're going to see your longus coli and your longus capitis. So both of these are cervical flexors, right? And this is actually a muscle on the front of your neck, and it's very deep. That's why it's called the deep cervical flexor here. And so this one concentrically accelerates flexion, lateral flexion, and ipsilateral rotation. So this one, you know, pulls the right. I could just say rotation, but so that's our deep cervical flexors here. Now, this is one of our weakened muscles, which always kind of surprises people because you're like, wait. We got too much forward head posture. Why would we need to strengthen one of the muscles here? Well, again, remember how I told you guys, it's not always an opposite muscle. It's not always an antagonist, right? In this case, the deep cervical flexors are supposed to be the main agonist for looking down, right? But instead, that sternocleidomastoid, which is a synergist, has taken over. And so it does this. And that's sort of the difference, right? Like there's a difference between just straight up cervical flexion and cervical flexion plus translation, right? This is our deep cervical flexors. This is our sternocleidomastoid. And so that is why that muscle tends to get really, really, really tight, you know? That sternocleidomastoid tightens up because that's what we tend to do. We tend to hunch over and arch our back while we are looking straight down. Then your deep cervical flexors can't do their job, which is to naturally tuck the chin. And that's one way to like naturally look just instantly a little bit taller, right? Kind of round your shoulders back and tuck your chin and then lean yourself up. It makes you just a little bit taller than, you know, when you're just kind of naturally sort of hunched over. So this is a muscle that we actually need to strengthen. Now, there are exercises that can do that directly. Come on. See, these are all actually the good ones. Well, you'll sometimes see people do actual like neck specific exercises. It's very silly looking. Come on, give me one. There we go. So you'll see these things here. You'll see people doing stuff like this, which is kind of goofy looking, side to side. And you know what, like, honestly, it can actually be effective if you are learning how to practice like tucking that chin. But honestly, if you're going to work on this, guys, you want to strengthen this, which I think everybody should. Some of the best stuff you can do is actually very simple. Even just going like this, getting into like a chin tuck or a cobra position and just pulling the chin back, or even like a cat-cow position here, and just pulling the chin back. That can be a really effective way to activate those deep cervical flexors. One of my favorite ways to do this is just simply to take my wallet with my clients, and I will have them just lay down on the floor. So if I just, let's see here. Let me just see if I can Google a picture of just somebody laying supine. Just naturally, just get our head up. Oh, there we go. It's kind of that's a perfect example. This is on Ace Fitness's website. So this person is doing a supine hamstring stretch. This is the demo that Ace, by the way, is one of NASM's competitors. But let's take a look at what's going on with the neck here. Do you guys find that if you just lay directly on the floor, this happens immediately? This sort of natural position here, where if you look at this, right, look at his eye line. I would say it's kind of going up at an angle like this, right? Like if I drew an arrow to where this guy is looking, I'd say he's looking somewhere over there, because his head is tilted backwards. Now, if we were to just ask them to tuck their chin and elevate that ever so slightly, what's going to naturally happen is that is going to result in a posture that's either looking forward or directly straight up. And you can see like these are really good demos. Yeah, it gives you the double chin, which I know is like something that sometimes people are trying to avoid. But like that straight up eye line there, you know, this girl is she's doing a chest press here, which is great, but she's also getting a little bit of deep cervical flexor action. Right. And that is something that we really want to put some emphasis on, right? Just focusing, again, I'd say this guy a little bit, you know, he's got a little bit of backwards, but like not bad, right? We want to tuck our chin as if we are standing straight up against a wall. That is going to activate those deep cervical flexors that are honestly like way too underactive. So just doing that kind of passive work can actually be a very effective way to get those muscles turned on. And then you don't have to spend all day doing all of this like chin tuck stuff, you know? You can see he's obviously working on it here. Just laying like that for like 30 seconds can be a decent enough activator. Or even just like focusing on, you know, like I said, pulling that head back. That is going to be really good for those deep cervical flexors. So the longest coli and the longest capitis here, both of these are going to be really good muscles for pulling that head up. Those are your two major deep cervical flexors. Longest capitis is back here. You can actually feel that if you go to those little knobs on the very bottom of your skull, you give that a little bit of a press, you can feel that muscle back there. And so this one also does cervical flexion and a little bit of lateral flexion as it's pulling. So these are the muscles we want to strengthen most times. And these muscles here are two of the muscles that we want to loosen up if we've got a client with that forward head posture, which we will definitely have a client or two with that forward head posture. And then last of the new ones we're going to see is our Levator Scapulae, Levator Scapula. This one, it's in the name, right? It elevates the scapula. So it is running to the skull right here, and it comes down and grabs our scapula right there. And so when it pulls our shoulder blades up. So it concentrically accelerates a little bit of cervical extension. So it is supposed to do a little bit of this. It does a little bit of lateral flexion, a little bit of rotation, right? But it also assists in the elevation and downward rotation of the scapula. So again, more of that downward rotation of the scapula, that rounding of the shoulders. This is another very commonly tight muscle. So this is another one we want to work on here. And so now we've sort of looked at stretching out our sternocleidomastoid, right? Doing something like this. We've looked at stretching out our scalenes, doing something like this. Well, now we want to work on that sort of backside. So we're going to get the levator scapula. So because it does ipsilateral rotation, right, my right side contracts me to the right. If I want to stretch that, I need to move to the left. And it does lateral flexion. So I'm going to do opposite. I'm going to go to my left, and then I'm going to tilt away. And then it does extension. So I'm going to do flexion. So I'm basically going to go in an angle like this. Best way I've ever had to coach people and tell them to do this, I tell them to smell their pit. That's honestly the best way to do it. So just go right there. And again, we want to drop that shoulder blade on the other side. And so that's going to loosen out. I need to do this on my other side. I'm spending all day stretching out my right. I'm going to be, I'm going to have a scoliosis by the end of this. So that is our levator scapula, right? We want to basically get all three of those angles. If you've got a client with forward head posture, which again, most clients do, these are some of the most effective stretches that we've got for it, right? So levator scapula definitely makes it onto our tight muscles list. Let's just go ahead and confirm that. Let's go ahead and take a look over at Ad Nasum's solutions table here. Now, this is not necessarily a squat thing. This is actually going to be something that we see. If you look over here, you'll see it in the pushing/pulling assessment. We're going to look at this tomorrow, but you will see here are our tight muscles. So our probable overactive muscles is this column on the left. Our probable underactive muscles is this column on the right. So probable overactive, upper trapezius, which we're going to review that one in just a second, but we talked about it yesterday, right? That's the one that lives on top of the scalenes. Sternocleidomastoid and levator scapula. And then again with the, so that's the, oh, I'm sorry, that was the shoulders elevating. Those are the tight muscles for shoulders elevating. And then if we look at forward head posture, oh, guess what? They're the same muscles. Upper trapezius, sternocleidomastoid, levator scapula. So three of the most commonly overactive muscles. You'll notice they're not listing scalenes here. And the reason for that, I think they're just trying to be simplistic. If you are stretching your upper trapezius, which lives on top of your scalenes, guess what? You're stretching your scalenes. So if it were me, I would put a slash here and say scalenes, but they're kind of being simplistic about it. So what do we need to strengthen? Well, if the forward head posture is the problem, we need to strengthen those deep cervical flexors. And if the shoulders elevating is the problem, we go back to yesterday's lesson and we strengthen those middle/lower trapezius muscles. So we do got a couple other ones that we got to see here just from yesterday's lesson. Remember, we've got our rhomboids, right? We've got the major and minor fibers, right? The rhomboids minor is the one that also causes a little bit of downward rotation of the scapula. So it does kind of pull on the top of the scapula and dump it forward, similar to the way the levator scapula, which, you know, if we look at the rhomboids minor here, those are the upper fibers. And if you look at the levator scapula, so you can see here's the rhomboids minor, you know, the little top fibers here. And then there is the levator scapula, right? And so, you know, that is definitely covering the scapula, but it is, you know, again, it's like pulling at an angle like this. It's going to cause it to kind of dump forward. And again, that's that shoulder rounding that we see. So, you know, when you hear somebody say like, oh, you need to loosen up your rhomboids are a muscle you most oftentimes want to strengthen. But yes, in an example like this with somebody with rounded shoulders, the upper portions of those rhomboids might need to be loosened up slightly, which is where we do a little bit of foam rolling for the upper back and then kind of loosen up that whole area there. Just getting on that foam roller and just lightly pressing at the very top of our scapula. We never foam roll our low back. We never go into the lumbar spine, but we can definitely get into that thoracic section. And then another tight muscle from yesterday, we definitely know that we need to work on our upper trapezius, right? We got to loosen this freaking thing up because it does scapular elevation, which when the scapula elevates, that causes the head to kind of come forward, right? And then we sort of reach like this, and there we go. There's our sort of rounded posture that we're talking about. So again, what does this do? Well, it does scapular elevation. So how do we stretch it? Well, we're going to do scapular depression. So I'm going to drop this down. And then it also does lateral flexion. So I just flex to the other side. Again, it's the exact same as that scalenes stretch that we just did. You want to start your morning off great, by the way. Start it off with those three stretches. The sternocleidomastoid, scalenes, and trapezius scapula. I looked that up. I should see a picture there of how to work on that. Good Lord. Hey, haircut. Got had hair bad. Yeah, come on. Stretches. There we go. That kind of works. Somebody compiled these all together. But there you go. She's got by looking up, that's the sternocleidomastoid stretch, right? By looking directly to the side, that's the scalenes / upper trapezius stretch. And by looking down, that's the levator scapula. So spend 30 seconds in each of these guys in the morning. Oh, that's NASM blog. Of course it is. How to fix forward head posture according to NASM. That's really funny. But yeah, spend your morning like work on these three. There we go. That's such a better picture. So down for the levator scapula, up for the sternocleidomastoid, and to the side for the scalenes. And then you can activate those deep cervical flexors. Take just like 2 or 3 minutes. Elevate your head. Maybe like the way they always describe it is like a thin book, or I'm sorry, like a thick book, or like 3 or 4 magazines, like worth of like distance. So maybe a ½ inch just under the back of your head, tuck your chin, and then lay your head back down. And that will naturally put you into that, 90-degree eye line straight up towards the ceiling, alignment that we're looking for. We want to go sort of straight up, just like this is sort of what we want to ideally see. So, rotate that head ever so slightly down, tuck that chin. And then, like I said, muscles we want to strengthen. Middle trapezius from yesterday, right? The one that does scapular retraction. We want to teach our body how to scapularly retract properly rather than retracting while using the upper traps. And then lower trapezius there is going to help us drop those shoulder blades down. So like I said, one of my all-time favorite exercises for this, there's 2 of them, but my favorite one is probably the Yta exercise. This is also known as combo number 1. There we go. Oh, it's one of these videos. Okay, that's not helpful. NASM combo 1. Oh, that'll work. So YTAs are combo number 1. You can do this on a ball. You can do this simply bent over, but thumbs up going into a Y, thumbs up, you can go neutral, but I like thumbs up into a T. She does neutral. And then thumbs up going into an A. So YTA. You can also do that as a scoop. That's one of my favorite variations of this. So you just go up and then scoop it straight back while maintaining the thumbs up towards the ceiling. That's also a little bit more of a dynamic version, but that's a really good activator for those scapular muscles, middle trapezius, lower trapezius especially. Very, very, very good. So yeah, that's, like I said, guys, it's a shorter list today. Those are all our muscles. Any questions or comments? How y'all feeling?
Stretched.
Stretched? That's good. You say stressed or stretched?
Stretched.
Got it. Well, that is the end of the list. We've officially gone through every muscle on this chart. Now I will say we gave you the more advanced chart. There's 2 charts here. If you go to NASM's website, here is your original. This is the table you're going to find in your textbook right now, like your regular 7th edition NASM. It looks different because obviously this is meant to be printed as a handout. But here's the overactive muscles, right? And underactive muscles. But here's the more advanced list from corrective exercise. We have, over the last couple of days, gone through every muscle in these 2 columns here. So, if you look at this and you think, holy crap, that's complicated, it's not so bad. Think about how many times like things double up, right? Hopefully this gives us a better understanding of what we see when our clients' feet turn out, when their knees cave in, when their knees cave out sometimes, which is rare. Actually, we lost Simon, but Simon's actually a bit of a knee cave outer. Excessive lean, low back arch, low back round, arms fall forward, all that good stuff, right? Let's retool it. Let's flip it around, shall we? So we've got spinal flexion, and particularly we're going to be talking about cervical flexion today. But obviously there's also lumbar flexion. We've also got cervical extension and lumbar extension. Then we've got like rotation, right, side to side. And so when we're looking at what muscles are in charge of what, we have got the cervical flexion. That's going to mostly be your sternocleidomastoid. That's that muscle that we need to loosen up right there. The freaking thing is just it's like so freaking tight. I probably just made it tighter by flicking it, but definitely a muscle we want to stretch out. I like this picture, by the way. You can actually see the two separate like heads of fibers there. Most people are just kind of draw this as one straight line, but kind of like that picture. Then we've got our cervical extension muscles. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing that's being listed here. The way NASM listed this, they listed it as, for cervical extension, the Erector Spinae, which didn't make our list elsewhere. But remember, we mostly, when we're talking about the Erector Spinae, a lot of times we're just talking about the low back section, but it does run all the way up, and it becomes those deep cervical extensor muscles that we will see on the backside there. So this is often another muscle that we want to strengthen. However, don't make the mistake of doing this, and I'll talk about this tomorrow because I'm sure I'm going to see it. But if you look at like a Superman exercise, it's a really great movement. Going just like this. This girl right here is killing it, right? Let's see how this girl does. Yeah, also killing it. This one I do not like. I think that's a bad demo. That one's really good. This one is awful, terrible, not so great, right? Like, why don't I like those versus the other ones? Well, what you can see is they're actually doing way too much. They're doing like cervical extension where they're literally like reaching up with their heads. That's not what that exercise is about. Like, we're not working that portion of our neck here. If you actually want to strengthen the proper deep cervical flexors when you're doing like a Superman or a prone cobra or something like that, you want to do something like this, where you can see she's got a crazy amount of mobility. I mean, that's hyperextension of the low back. That's great mobility, but she's keeping her head tucked. She's not dropping it down. She's just tucking the chin straight back. Here's a really good example of that, right? Head's face straight down, arms go. It's almost as if she's standing directly against a wall there. So that's the kind of demo we want. We don't want to lift up with the head. Again, it's as if you are standing directly in alignment. That's pretty good too. Don't love that one. So don't lift that head up. Work on those deep cervical, and you're going to get a much better example. Those people are working their erector spinae when they go like this, right? Which honestly is fine. We need to strengthen the lower portions of it anyways. But if you want to get those deep cervical flexors, you need to make sure that you aren't turning them off by going into excessive spinal extension. So that's cervical extension there. Cervical lateral flexion, so the side to side movement, that is going to be your scalenes and your sternocleidomastoid. So the sternocleidomastoid is a really big one for that, right? Your scalenes are also going to lift that rib. So obviously that is going to affect our posture in very negative ways. Cervical rotation, that's the sternocleidomastoid. That's going to do that. And a little bit of the levator scapula. I don't know why they're not mentioning that here. But that one also does a little bit of that rotation movement. So again, guys, here's my encouragement to you for today. Just take a second and just everybody try this. Take the head, smell the pit, right? This is totally in my way. But just right here, get that levator scapula stretched out, and then do your other side. Take it over here, and then do your other side, and then take it right here, and then do your other side. It is going, you will feel like $1,000,000. It is a really, really good adjustment to make. And that is maybe the friggin' shortest lecture that I have had in a very long time. But that is all of our slides, and you guys have made it all the way through kinesiology. Other than, you know, the test portion tomorrow and the in-person meetup, which is going to be a really good one tomorrow. We're going to do a lot of upper body stuff tomorrow, looking at fixing all this upper body dysfunction. Upper body dysfunction. I love the party horn. But yeah, any questions? Any confusion on those? What 7, 8 muscles there? Guess not. All right. Well, let's kill the recording here. Oh no, where's my? Oh, did I forget to? Oh no, I didn't. Where's my stop record button?